Hello, I am Dr. Joseph Isaac, former Assistant Professor of Clinical Psychology, Government Medical College, and writer of 4 books on psychological treatment. Today, I am going to talk to you about a very important topic, namely the genetic causation theory of mental disorders. This theory, though completely outmoded and unscientific in the background of the revolutionary developments in the science of epigenetics, is even now widely accepted and propagated as a medical truth and science, and is fooling the entire world with lies. People who are not well versed in genetics or psychobiology blindly believe in the nonsense that genes are the biological determinants of behavior and mental disorders, and this belief in genetic determinism destroys all the scope for personality growth, individual freedom, free will, and choice. This belief in genetic determinism is absolutely against the revolutionary developments in modern science like quantum physics. And this massive propaganda is a deliberate and conscious attempt to make modern man a slave of genes and chemicals, and this is practically done for the promotion of drugs. In the name of science and in the name of biology, we are spreading an epidemic of superstitions about our genes, DNA, and chemicals, though now it is proved beyond doubt that the human mind is programming all our genetic and cellular network, the 50 trillion cells of our body. In actual reality, it is not genes that activate behavior or personality traits, but the mind activates all the genes and its expressions. The famous stem cell biologist and professor of cellular biology, Dr. Bruce Lipton, who made revolutionary researches in the field of epigenetics, strongly argues that genes are only a blueprint and it can never be activated or made on or off without the intervention of your powerful mind in relation with environmental factors. The genetic causation theory claims that mental disorders are caused by bad genes or aberrations in the genetic structures. The role of genes is hysterically exaggerated in all the spheres of our life, and materialism has become dominant as science in modern time. In the field of psychiatry, this exaggeration of genes has reached its pinnacle to a pathological state for the promotion of drug prescriptions, due to the infiltration of the philosophy of materialism, already abandoned by quantum physics and superstitious biological determinism. In the very outset, I declare this claim of a genetic involvement in mental illness a Himalayan lie, and I consider that this belief in genetic causation had ruined the field of mental health in the past in a devastating manner. As a result of this belief, emotional problems due to life stress had been medicalized, and psychiatric prescriptions have become prescriptions of disaster and damage. This happens because people with a medical background propagate this dogmatic belief in the name of science, and the lay people and even educated people blindly believe in the absoluteness of gene and genetic determinism had been accepted as a great truth in the biological sphere. Genetic determinism is the notion that genes control all our traits, behavior, physical and emotional expressions. This belief had imprisoned our growth and made us helpless victims of our heredity and the scope for overcoming our illnesses by employing hard efforts or karma and the participation of the patient in the healing process and alliance also got blocked. Later, with the advancement of researchers in biology, the absoluteness of this belief had been questioned and genetic determinism had been established as a myth in cellular biology. The revolutionary science of epigenetics, had changed our perspective of genes and had emphasized the importance of mind over our genes. The great cellular biologist Dr. Bruce Lipton had questioned the theory of genetic determinism and concluded, within quotes, our health is not controlled by genetics. Our health is not controlled by genetics. Conventional medicine is operating from an archaic view that we are controlled by genes. This misunderstands the nature of how biology works, close quotes. Dr. Bruce Lipton, after his long years of stem cell research, argues that our gene activity can get shaped and altered by our perception. And this perception is ultimately determining the fate of the cells. In his famous book, Spontaneous Evolution, he criticized the allopathic medicine for blindly giving supremacy for our genes and concluded that it is the mind that steers all the course and progression of our health and disease. Dr. Lipton said, within quotes, now consider that this is exactly how allopathic medicine perceives human disease as an expression of an inherent physical defect in the body, most likely due to genetic mutation. This diagnosis ignores the role of body's driver, the mind. The science of epigenetics recognizes that the environment, not the DNA in the nucleus, determines the action of cells. Information from the environment is translated into biological response via the action of cell membrane, which acts as cell's skin as well as its brain. The cell membrane is more accurately a crystal semiconductor with gates and channels. Those words also define a computer chip, which reminds us that both computers and cells are programmable. And drum roll, please, for each, the programmer is always outside the mechanism. The programmer of the field, the genius behind the genes, is none other than our own mind, our own thoughts and beliefs. Pages 140 to 141 of the book Spontaneous Evolution. The great mind researcher and famous clinical psychologist, Dr. T.Y.C. Colbert, in his famous book Blaming Our Genes, had critically evaluated the genetic theory of mental illness and concluded in the following manner, within quotes: no gene has ever been found for any mental illness. This after a search of the entire human genome. When the behavior or symptoms of those labeled as mentally ill are looked at closely, the behavior is not random. But purposeful. The person employs his or her symptoms as defense mechanisms to ward off an overload of emotional pain. In other words, he or she has created the behavior for a reason. Intentional and purposeful behavior cannot be reduced to the deterministic cause and effect level of a defective gene. In summary, as this book elaborates and substantiates each of the above areas, it will become quite evident that mental illness is not and cannot be inherited. Pages number 11 to 12. Researchers in the past have tried to delineate the gene or genes involved in autism, schizophrenia, Alzheimer's, ADHD, alcoholism, depression, and other mental illnesses. But these futile, mad explorations to find a gene had thoroughly failed. These futile, mad explorations to find a gene had thoroughly failed. People jump into the hasty conclusion that these disorders are genetic because they run in families and do have increased prevalence rate in many people in the families. This is a wrong attribution of causation because many other factors like poverty, child abuse, eating patterns, drinking habits, economic affluence all run in families in a similar nature. But nobody consider this as genetic. Just because certain factors do exist in families, jumping into the conclusion that this is caused by genetic reasons is nothing but a fallacious thinking, a wrong thinking. This according to me, according to me, points out to more of an environmental involvement caused by emotional conditioning instead of genetic inheritance. Researchers in this field, in spite of all their prolonged efforts, have not been able to find a reliable genetic test or genetic markers for any of these disorders, including schizophrenia or other mental disorders. Schizophrenia is not in any way proved to be a genetic disorder or medical disease. Schizophrenia is a mind disorder characterized by disturbance of thought, affect, behavior, and loss of touch with reality to the extent of developing perceptual disorder like hallucinations and illusions and delusions. According to me, schizophrenia is a choice to live in an unreal world of id level of functioning, to use a Freudian terminology. Medical tests like blood tests or brain scan cannot locate the presence or absence of schizophrenia because it is not a material thing. Only psychological tests can detect this pathological personality change. Dr. T.Y.C. Colbert, the great American clinical psychologist, in his book Blaming the Genes, had said, within quotes, I have worked with individuals diagnosed as schizophrenic for over 20 years. I had never found symptoms of any two alike, especially the better I have come to know each person. Even the strictest definition of schizophrenia manifests a very wide range of symptoms and behaviors. Furthermore, any patient who has been diagnosed as mentally ill for any extended period of time will likely have that diagnosis changed over time and from professional to professional. Part of the problem is lack of reliability of the diagnostic processes. But this is also due to the fact that these included symptoms change over time. Close relatives will tell you that these individuals sometimes seemed very anxious and other times depressed or manic. At other times, the same individual may appear to lose his or her sense of reality. In fact, the more you listen to the parents, particularly as they describe their schizophrenic child's condition over an extended period of time, the more you realize that these diagnoses or labels mean very little and are only there for the convenience of researchers and professionals. Diagnosing someone as schizophrenic may appear scientific on the surface, especially when biopsychiatry keeps claiming that a genetic brain disease is involved. But when you step back and observe from a distance what these researchers are really doing, you wonder how they can justify their work. They simply look at a big family, make subjective decisions regarding diagnosis, expand and contract the diagnosis for their own benefits, subject the data to several other variables, and then see if some harmless genetic marker lines up more often than other markers. And if so, then they claim that they have located a gene that has never been found. A gene that has never been found. Even if some sort of related was found, it may not even cause schizophrenia. It may only slightly influence its susceptibility. This is not science. This is not science. This is simply the mathematical manipulation of meaningless data, close quotes. What Dr. Colbert, what great psychologist Dr. Colbert said above is fully right. Diagnosing somebody on the basis of a menu of symptoms based on a checklist manual called the DSM, as it is done today, and claiming it as medical diagnosis is highly misleading, vague, and subjective. There are absolutely no valid medical tests to diagnose schizophrenia or any other mental disorder in a laboratory setup. Psychiatric diagnosis is thus pure guesswork based on mere symptoms of behavior. Dr. Thomas Sass, Emeritus Professor of Psychiatry in the Syracuse University, has said, within quotes, schizophrenia is defined so vaguely. Schizophrenia is defined so vaguely that in actuality it is a term applied to almost any kind of behavior of which the speaker disapproves, close quotes. The genetic causation of schizophrenia is also scientifically invalid, based on pure guesswork. The genetic inheritance research, which backs up the medical model of mental illness, is highly erroneous and has no scientific basis. Famous psychiatrist Dr. Colin Ross has criticized the way in which the dogmatic biological approach is reinforced in psychiatry without critical thinking. In his famous book, Pseudoscience in Biological Psychiatry, Blaming the Body, Dr. Colin Ross has expressed this grave concern in the following manner, within quotes. It was not surprising that medical students accepted the dogma of biological reductionism in psychiatry uncritically. They had not time to read and analyze the original literature. What took me a while to understand as I moved through my residency was that psychiatrists rarely do the critical reading either. The dogma that the genetic foundation of schizophrenia has been scientifically established is by and large accepted without serious question in contemporary psychiatry, close quotes, page number 87. The results of twin studies and adoptive inherited studies that are often quoted in psychiatry to give an impression that schizophrenia is genetically caused is another manipulative trick or gimmick to make schizophrenia a medical disease. In actual reality, twin studies conducted in this area does not support the genetic basis. On the other hand, critical analysis of the actual data revealed an environmental basis of schizophrenia. In 1986, Dr. David Cohen concluded the findings of twin studies in the following manner, within quotes, the only unquestionable result of twin genetic studies is that they demonstrate the extensive contribution of environmental factors to etiology of the disorder, close quotes. It has been noted that the adoptive studies conducted by the National Institute of Mental Health on adoptive children in Denmark is often quoted wrongly to support the genetic basis of schizophrenia. This is also mere distortion of facts. The great American psychiatrist Dr. Peter Breggin has questioned this distortion of facts in his famous book Toxic Psychiatry, while reviewing the biological genetic basis of schizophrenia. Dr. Breggin said, within quotes, when I located the original 1975 summary report on the Danish study by Ketty and his colleagues in the book Genetic Research in Psychiatry, I was shocked by what I found. There was no increase in so-called schizophrenia among the close biological relatives, including the mothers, fathers, full brothers, and full sisters. Thus, the study actually tended to disprove the genetic origin of the presumed illness. So what data were they using to prove a genetic tendency? They had made a most strange finding that the half-brothers and half-sisters on the father's side did have an increased rate of schizophrenia. In other words, we have a miracle gene that skips the biological mothers, fathers, brothers and sisters on the mother's side and strikes only the half-siblings on the father's side. Close quotes. Dr. Breggin had concluded, within quotes, there is simply no evidence in the most highly tutored studies for a genetics factor for schizophrenia. Instead, their failure to detect any genetic influence tends to confirm an environmental origin for schizophrenia overwhelm. It discredits psychiatry that these studies have been used to prove the opposite of what they really show, and that the public has been consciously propagandized with misleading information. Because of psychiatrist's influence in the media, most people think that there is a growing body of studies supporting the genetic origin of psychiatric disorders, such as so-called schizophrenia. In reality, literature supporting a genetic cause for schizophrenia has grown sparser over the years. Close quotes, pages 97 to 99. The famous American psychiatrist and clinical instructor at Harvard Medical School, Dr. Joseph Glenmullen, had shown great intellectual honesty and courage to criticize the genetic determinism theory in psychiatry. In his famous book, Prozac Backlash, Dr. Glenmullen had critically evaluated the genetic causation theory of mental illness and declared it as inappropriate and bogus. Dr. Glenmullen said, within quotes, "Yet another cornerstone of disease model, closely related to biochemical imbalances, is the idea of genetic inheritance. A number of times in recent decades, prominent headlines have announced how the gene for maniac depression was found. One of these was a particularly prestigious study done by researchers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Yale University, and the University of Miami, and published in the international scientific journal Nature. Each time the announcements were hailed as extraordinary medical breakthroughs, but none of the studies stood the test of time. Upon close scrutiny, all of them had to be retracted. Unfortunately, the retractions did not receive the same publicity, so many people left to believe that genes had been found for a great many mental states, and that more related discoveries are being proven at regular intervals. No claim of a gene for psychiatric condition has stood the test of time in spite of popular misinformation. No claim of a gene for psychiatric condition has stood the test of time in spite of popular misinformation. Close quotes, page number 198. When we discuss here seriously the so-called genetic theory of mental illness, to reach a scientific consensus and scientific conclusion with an intention to remove the superstitious materialistic confusion clouding mental health, a great researcher like Dr. J.Joseph in the mental health field needs special mention and consideration. Dr. J.Joseph is an internationally famous clinical psychologist who spent his entire life conducting researches on genetics and mental disorders. In his groundbreaking book, The Missing Gene, Psychiatry, Heredity, and Fruitless Search for Genes, Dr. J. Joseph criticized the genetic theory and argued that genetic causation does not exist, and had concluded his wonderful book, The Missing Gene, in the following manner, within quotes, genes for the major mental disorders are unlikely to exist, close quotes. In his another famous book, The Gene Illusion, Genetic Research in Psychiatry and Psychology under the Microscope, he had criticized the genetic theory left and right and summarized the findings of his research in detail. And I am citing here his relevant findings for your valuable information. 1. The twin method is an invalid instrument for the detection of genetic influences on psychological trait differences and psychiatric conditions. 2. There is little evidence that schizophrenia and most other psychiatric conditions have a genetic basis. 3. Schizophrenia adoption studies have been to varying degrees methodologically unsound and has been unable to disentangle possible genetic and environmental condition. 4. There is little evidence that socially undesirable behaviors such as criminality have a genetic basis. 5. There is little evidence pointing to the existence of specific genes for psychiatric disorders or human psychological trait variation. 6. Concepts such as schizophrenia, intelligence, personality, and criminality are often difficult to define and are controversial, even though human genetic researchers tend to ignore this. Thus, when we analyze critically all the relevant available data based on researches done in the scientific field so far, we have solid reasons to conclude that genetic or chemical factors has absolutely no place in the causation of mental disorders. All the stories about chemical imbalances and genetic causations of mental disorders are thus proved to be futile speculations and imaginary theories cooked by biological psychiatry and its allies for the sales of psychiatric drugs with a remote intention to dominate the mental health field. The great modern revolutionary discovery in epigenetics that our mind controls our genes should be reinforced in society to enhance mind power, and the miraculous power of the mind must be given the due importance so that choice is possible for people to behave and interact. So let us all unite. To eliminate the superstitious materialism in mental health field that is spreading like an infection and damaging the mental health of modern man. And we should place the wonderful mind in its proper place in the mental health field. Mind can never be successfully treated by poisonous chemicals. It can only damage our cells and make people disabled. Thus can never improve the brain or the mind. It can only disable and deteriorate and get damaged. Mind can only be treated by mind technology in quantum psychology with the cooperation of the patient. The cooperation of the patient is the most important factor in the treatment of the mind. Mind over matter reigns. mind, our genes, trains. Thank you very much.